for attending today. Welcome to my AIA CES course, How to Enable Real-Time Revit Collaboration in the Cloud. My name is Mark McDonough. I work for Advanced 2000, and my role is AEC Application Specialist, and otherwise known as the CAD BIM Manager in the Cloud. A little bit about my background to give some context. I have 35 years experience in the AEC field. About half of that time was practicing architecture for a variety of architectural firms, and the other half, almost equally split, was as a CAD and BIM manager for a large architecture engineering firm outside of Boston, and with Sasaki Associates. And just as a reminder, today this class is worth one learning unit, and so far as the learning unit, this is for this session. I will be posting this course afterwards, and it'll be available through GoToMeeting as well as on the Advanced 2000 website. And but it is only actually valued as one learning unit for AIA CES while it's delivered live. At some point in the future, we'll figure out how to actually post these things and provide the required quizzes on the things that are required for the AIA CES. And this is the obligatory copyright notice. And today, I want to be spending time. I'm not going to read the actual course description, but I wanted to focus in instead on BIM Project Cloud, which is a type of private cloud, and describe its difference with public cloud. But again, the focus is going to be in the BIM Project Cloud. Is kind of a more focused version of a private cloud, and how that relates to distributed data versus centralized data. These come into play. I'm going to go ahead, and just so you get the full screen experience for the rest of the webinar, I am going to actually take my webcam off. There we go. Okay, so for learning objectives, as I mentioned, we will be looking primarily at this thing called a BIM Project Cloud. It's becoming very popular as a good way to collaborate real time with your engineers. One of the few solutions out there. We're actually going to learn about Revit work sharing. For those of you who are not necessarily very familiar with Revit and how work sharing is enabled, I will go ahead and do this live in a demonstration, and you'll be able to see what kind of tools support that collaborative environment. And this is really important because if you look at how Revit actually has a smart built-in synchronization in these components, how you can split up the work with work sets, that type of intelligence for the synchronization doesn't play well with third-party sync tools, which aren't as smart. And so things like Dropbox and other sorts of syncing solutions really don't do a good job with that. I'll show very briefly, again, in a real-time example, how you can collaborate with multiple firms in a project cloud and do this in a secure area. And you do this with linked models. So all the Revit RVT files are linked together and can be updated at any given moment. And I'm actually going to spend some time talking about Revit Server itself, because this comes up a lot, and it's a largely misunderstood resource. But because it ships free with Revit on the DVD, people want to use it. So it's worth understanding how the thing actually operates and functions, so you have a clear idea. And so when you go to say a private cloud or BIM cloud computing, you know how it might relate or know the context of it. So I spent a lot of time looking for definitions of public cloud versus private cloud, and there's also hybrid clouds. And most of these are very dry paragraphs, and a little bit hard to sort of assimilate. So what I've done is I try to boil this down to simple one-words or phrases that really separate out and distinguish one from the other. So the first is public cloud is almost universally accessed through the internet. Whereas a private cloud can be accessed through the internet, but more than likely, for a better quality experience, more reliable line and throughput and so forth, you'll be establishing or using a private point-to-point type circuit, which gives, again, a much better experience overall. Public clouds most often come in this category, what I call single-purpose clouds. And these can be quite good. There's lots of them out there, such as the Autodesk has a whole bunch of different cloud resources like Green Building Studio and the Autodesk 360 for file storage and 360 rendering. I've used all these myself. They're good. There's lots of these around. Everybody and his brother today has their own cloud resources. So these have to do usually with an application or service or infrastructure, but it's rare that they're all together. On the other hand, a private cloud is really your scalable office or project in the cloud. So it really is the fundamental infrastructure of your cloud environment as well as the apps that go into it. So it's much more of a total solution. Now, I mentioned the distributed data versus centralized data, and if you evaluate your options out there for cloud computing, you're going to find almost everything falls into these two camps. So, but most of the public cloud offerings are actually distributed data, and after you start having a bunch of these things, so I have some files over on Google Drive, and I have some up on Autodesk 360 and other places. Before you know it, you got a lot of different data spread all over the place, and I call these data silos. And then you feel almost compelled, well, I got to start using something like Jungle Disk or SugarSync or Dropbox or whatever now to replicate all this data around to all my different places. And before you know it, you've got a garage full of all these different boxes of data, as opposed to this concept of centralized data, where you put it all in one place. And this is where you bring people to where your data resides. And I think that's a more elegant way to go, and it has a number of advantages. The other thing about public cloud is they're really geared towards mass market, and you have sort of various off-the-shelf offerings with some gradations of those offerings. But it's not very customizable. You have some options, but it's not totally customizable, as opposed to the private cloud is totally and 100% customizable. It can be anything you want it to be. So if you want it to look just like your office, it has a certain number of desktops and seats and so forth, it has a certain number of servers and types of servers, certain types of applications, that's what the private cloud can become. So a lot of people ask, how do you actually get to the cloud? And it's very, very simple. And usually just use a little piece of software. The major players out there, whether it be VMware or Citrix or Microsoft, all have these little free downloadable client pieces of software that will allow you from any device, whether it be a laptop, a PC, your iPad, or a phone, and you can connect to a desktop with this piece of software. So in this diagram, if I were to hit the connect button, then suddenly I'm going to be launched into my desktop up here in the cloud. And of course, you're not there by yourself, because this is a project cloud. Again, it's a type of private cloud, and you have your friends, your buddies, your workmates also have seats. Your team members have seats in this cloud. So I'm going to further diagram what a typical project cloud might look like. And this is specifically revolved around Revit and BIM, because this particular product, Revit, and the whole BIM arena is what pushes collaboration perhaps more than any other application out there. So that's why the project cloud, I think, is a very viable alternative for almost any office that's looking to collaborate with their engineers. So here's a typical example where I have a project cloud. I'm going to have a certain number of seats. I got 5 architects who are now have seats in the cloud. They have different devices. They can install this. They can run, connect to their cloud desktop from their home PC or their home laptop, as well as their office resources, almost anywhere. They are working with some engineers, some MEP engineers, and they have 3 seats in the same cloud. And the structural engineer is also on board in this team. And each of these entities can load their Revit central file up to the cloud. There's going to be some shared folders that they can all use, as well as some secure folders in areas that they can keep their information all together and secure. And they can collaborate real time. They actually link the models in together. And when they make updates, everybody in the team will see those updates real time. Now, I get asked a lot about licensing in the cloud, and it really depends on the application, and there's different models out there. But so far as a BIM Project Cloud, you're really talking about Revit and Autodesk products. And how that can typically work, and this works just fine, is that most clouds will have a VPN connection back to each business entity, and that facilitates local printing. So if you're up in the cloud and you have a great project going on, you want to print out a set to your HP 5000 large format plotter, you can go ahead and do that, and that's facilitated again through a VPN connection back. You can also, once you have that connection, you can also see your local network license manager that you're using for Autodesk network licensing. And you can just simply extend your licensing up into the cloud. So it's actually pretty easy to do. So at this point, I'm going to minimize this PowerPoint presentation, and we're going to actually go on and look at, do a little tour of what a desktop looks like in the cloud. All right, so you're seeing now my desktop. I'm on a laptop, and I have 2 desktops already pre-opened here. These desktops are about 500 miles away in a data center. And so one's for the architect and one's for the engineer. I just did this kind of to simulate how you might actually experience working in a project cloud. So I'm going to jump onto the architect's desktop, and it looks just like your regular desktop in your office, doesn't it? It has all your Autodesk applications over here, you know, AutoCAD and Revit and so forth. It has your Office applications, Microsoft Excel and Word, PowerPoint. It has your mail up there. Any application, you can see SketchUp over here, any application that you can install on your desktop, on your on-premise desktop or home PC or laptop, whatever, it can be installed on the cloud. So all those resources are there. And if we look at Windows Explorer, we have our drives. We have a local C drive and so forth, which is typical. And we have some network drives. So I have set up in this particular domain, these drives incidentally could be anything you want them to be. Typically a team will decide what the drives need to be and how they're going to work together ahead of time. And there can be security applied to all these folders. This is just like your regular Windows. This is a regular Windows file server. And you can see that there is a file server behind this. It's called FS01. And in the project drive, I see I have 3 projects already. And if I expand one a little bit, and I have a BIM area, CAD area, and I'm going to drop into the architect area, you can see I already have some Revit files in here. And we also have, of course, engineers on board here. So we have the MEP folks, and we have the structural engineer. We don't necessarily want, they may not actually be participating in all these projects. So you can set up security where they can only see 1 or 2 or whatever they're actually working with. All totally configurable. I have a resources drive, an R for resources drive, where I have things like the project manual, software downloads. You might have utilities that you're using up on the cloud for that for this collaboration. Project standards and team procedures, very, very important when you're working in the cloud. This is probably the first time in reality that you're actually sitting, it's like sitting in a room side by side with your engineers, and they're going to have to work together and link your files together. And this is kind of a new thing, and you might have to develop some team procedures to make that work smoothly. And you have, in this scenario, a secure drive, which is for your secure entities or your business's files. So this is the architect. So if I click on this, I open it up, you can see that I have an S architect area, and I have all my architectural stuff in here. I got budgets and codes, information, meeting notes, and all the stuff that you typically have for a project. But only I can see that. The engineer cannot see that. And to prove that, I'm going to go ahead and launch the other desktop, the engineer's desktop. He has similar sort of shortcuts here to launch things, and you've got Explorer up and all the sort of same apps. But if I go to his network drives, he's got the same drives, of course, because we're in the same domain, and click on S, and he's got a structure folder. That's all that he sees there is his structural. He does not see the other entities' folders. And if I open up this little text file, it says only the structural engineer has rewrite access to this folder as structural. This is probably the most talked about or asked question that I often get about what happens for security up on a project cloud. And it's actually pretty simple. Okay, so let's go back to the architect's desktop. Now you notice what I've been doing here is this is another feature of these software, these virtual software clients, is that they have a toolbar. They're all kind of similar. They might have different options that you can access your controls up here. I can disconnect and log off. I can Control-Alt-Delete so I can lock my desktop. But most importantly, you have a little button here that lets you minimize and get back to your actual desktop. So that's pretty good, pretty cool. Okay, now that we just looked around the actual cloud desktop in this case, let's jump on to Revit. We'll start with the architect. And I already have Revit open. This is Revit 2014. It's all fully packed and whatnot. And I'm going to go ahead and open up a file. And I'm going to use my shortcut. I put a shortcut in here. This is customizable to my BIM area up on the cloud. And I got some of these files in here. Now, already you're going to see some intelligence in Revit when you start using the open dialog box, because it's a work sharing area. Now, right now, I haven't pointed to any files that doesn't know much about work sharing until I actually click on a file. So if I click on this one that's named AIA Demo Central, notice that this part comes alive and says, oh, create a new central. It does that because it knows it's a central file. And it knows it not because it's named central. It knows it intrinsically that when the work sets are enabled or not. If I click on this one here, this Boston residence, it does not give me that option because work sharing is not yet enabled. So we're going to open that file, and we're going to turn that file into a work shared file so you get a sense of how that actually happens and what that process is. Okay, that file opened up. Now, this may look very familiar to you if you're using Revit 2014 because this is just the sample file. And it actually is a Boston residence. And I just renamed the file that so I could do this demo. I wanted to use a simple file to keep this whole process very simple. Now, to enable work sharing in a collaborative model, you need to go to the Collaborate tab. How sensible is that? And notice that a lot of the options here are grayed out because we haven't enabled collaboration yet. So I'll go ahead to the WorkSets tool over here and just click on that. And this is going to be what starts the whole work sharing process. It gives you a little warning saying that this is going to become a work shared file and it needs some careful planning and management. But actually, it's not that hard. There's lots of guidelines out there. It's pretty easy stuff, and it's very flexible. So it gives you two work sets to begin with, one called Shared Levels and Grids, the other called Workset 1 that's not very usable or useful. I'm going to just change that and call it Model and say OK. Now, this is going to take a little bit. It takes about 45 seconds to a minute. This file is about 25 megabytes currently. You would do this perhaps after schematic design on a project where you're really going to start up your Revit team and start working in real life. and while the files are still relatively small. And you only do this once in the life of a project. So it takes maybe a minute or two to convert it to work sets, and then you might spend 1, 2, or 3 hours separating out entities onto the right work sets once you've done that. So we'll actually, when this comes up, it'll come up in a second or two, we'll actually, here it goes, we will create a couple more work sets just to get a sense of how they actually get done. So I'm going to call one furnishings. Okay, we'll make another one called interior partitions. Okay, that's enough. And say OK. Now, I made those work sets. Nothing's really on them yet. They haven't done anything until I actually put something on them. And I will simulate that very quickly. I'm just going to go ahead and window a bunch of stuff. And I'm going to put some stuff on the furnishing and use there's a tool in Revit called filter. It's down here. I found a bunch of things, all by category. It's showing me all the categories. I can select check none. And I'm going to put some casework on, in this case, and I'll also go ahead and put the furniture on this particular work set. Apply. OK. Not on the work set quite yet. Almost there. It's telling me in the properties I found multiple categories of things here because I selected 2 different categories. And its work set now is set for model. Let's change that for furnishings. And apply. OK. Quite simple. This process is very, very simple. If you make a mistake putting something on the wrong work set, you can move them at will. You can create new work sets very easily. You can turn them off and on. So they're highly flexible, very easy, and you can separate out your work. So think of these, for those who aren't familiar how to work in Revit, that these are sort of like layers, but a little bit more powerful because it actually gives you privileges to work on things when you are assigned a work set, or you actually take possession of a work set during an editing process. But you can also use very handy like layers to turn them off if you don't want to see stuff to work on a clearer screen. At this point, I'm going to go back to my Collaborate tab, just remove that selection, and I still don't have everything here yet. That's because I'm sort of twixt in between right now. I've activated work sets, but now Revit wants this file to become a central file. If I go to Save up here, it tells me that I probably really want to use the Save As command instead, because that's going to give me a chance to rename the file. And I recommend as a standard that you always receive the file and append it with the word central, so that it's plain and obvious what you're doing. So I'm going to go to the Save As command, save it as a project, and we will call this, I'll just call it, we've done see a bunch of tests there. I'm going to call it Test 4 Revit. And I'll call it, I won't forget my own rule, call it Test 4 Central. There are some options here. I click on Options. You see that automatically it's going to make that first save essential anyway, because it knows it has to be from what I just did. And there is an option here how work sets open by default, and I recommend changing it some. You can leave it at the last few, but this setting here is often a BIM Manager's standard or office standard, so it needs to be reviewed which you think is best. And that's set for all. And I'm going to save at this point. This is creating a central file from which other people can now all collaborate and work in together. So if 10 people want to work in this file, they can now because it's become a central file. Let's go ahead and at this point just close out of this. Okay, I'm going to go up and reopen, let's go right here, that same central file I just made, Test 4 Central. I'm sorry, pointing to the wrong thing here. Can't see. All right, and when I pick this Test 4 Central file, it knows it's a work shared file, and it defaults to creating a new local. This is really smart how Revit does this, because it's going to put it down into my document, so you're going to be working faster. The local replica of the full central model. And you're going to be working locally and just send you changes back to the central model at intervals during the day as you do stuff. Notice this. It's named the file test/central _ Joe Architect.revit. It's very smart. It actually knows and it keeps the separate replica files and names them automatically after the user. So it becomes, again, unambiguous as to how, what file that you're actually working in. And if I were to do something, we'll do something very simple here and quick. I won't spend a lot of time on this. And I'm going to highlight this chair here and just drag it on down. That, now that I'm working in a collaborative environment, if I want to push these changes back to the central file so everybody can have the same update, you use the Collaborate tab and you synchronize with Central. This becomes your friend once you've done the enablement of WorkSet. So there's two options here. I'll explain these a little bit later as to the differences, but we're going to do the synchronize now. And very quickly, this will just save just that little portion back, that one change back to the central file. It is now available to everybody. If you have your team members are working on other stuff and they are also updating central files, occasionally during the day you want to do the reload latest option. I don't have a team member that's done anything here recently, so it says there are no changes to load, which is fine, but their changes will come down so you can very easily stay in sync with that central file through the day, which is really, really terrific. It's a very smart way of working. I'm going to close out of this application now. We're going to go into an open. Oh, this reminds me. When you're in a central file, and now you're in my local replica of it, it is always doing this. It will present this dialog box at the end of your, when you close a drawing or close a project. It wants to relinquish the elements and work set that you have. I should have showed you, again, let me just cancel that quickly here, that I go back to work sets. I do own these work sets now because I'm the only one currently in it, but it could be multiple players, and you might have some, typically just some or few of the work sets, not all of them. And that can change during the day if you want to borrow different ones. But so when you go to close out of your project, it always asks you, do you want to relinquish these? Again, this is an office standard, whether it's always best to check them all back in at the end of the day so that all are available to everybody the next day. Or in a smaller project, you might just say, I want to keep my ownership of, I've been working on walls and ceilings, so I want to keep those work sets. It's up to you, but again, it becomes probably a standard in the office. Now let's move on to an actual demonstration of that's a live collaboration. Let's go to open a project that's a little bit more baked, same file, but with more work sets completed, and I'll say open. Now notice that here, when you work during the day, every time you create this local file, this local replica file in your My Documents folder, it sits there, and you're saving back to Central every day. So it's really, if you've saved and back to Central on a regular basis, it becomes expendable. You can't just overwrite it each day. Or if you really want to be cautious, you can say append timestamp to the existing file name. It's your choice. I'm just going to overwrite the existing. Okay, so that's opening up, and it's basically the same file. And I have some work sets, but here, if I go to Collaborate, look at my work sets, I have more of them. I don't have them all. But the engineer has some of the work sets. He's a trusted engineer, and I don't mind him working directly in my models. I know it's a rare case, but this is in my example here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, getting close to a spot right here. We're going to make a change eventually. And let's go back to our other desktop, which is the engineer's desktop, and load his Revit. And his Revit's actually already opened. And we'll open the exact same file. So it's the same procedure. He's got a shortcut. His goes to his structural folder here, so I need to go back up a folder or two. Let's go to the architecture folder and pick that same AIA Central model. Same prompt, going to override existing because we've been working in this file. And we'll get to the same location. I think we already are. Okay. Now, when you click on something in Revit, when workshops are enabled and you don't own it, it's going to show this little like a little sugar cube icon, and you can mouse over it. It says that make element editable. Or if I actually try to drag this wall and move that wall, it's going to give me an error and a chance to request. They place a request for editing. Let's go ahead and place a request because I want to move that wall. Tells me the request was placed. Let's go back to the architect. And an editing request appears in the corner, pops up and tells me that it wants to do a request. If I was not in the right view or zoomed way out, I can hit the show button and it zooms right into the element that's being requested for edit. I can grant or deny. If I miss this pop-up for some reason, I can go to the Collaborate tab. There is editing request up here, and gives me my details. If I expand this of what he wants, and I can same thing once I click on the request, I can say show where it is. I'm going to at this point deny that request. And close. I go back to the architect. Excuse me, the engineer. And when I go back there, he learns that the editing request has been denied. Okay. Which is fine. Now, let's do a change. Let me zoom out a little bit here. We'll make a change to the architect side. So I'll go back just here one more time. And we're going to move a wall. Because I have privileges to, I have the work set, I have interior partitions work set as belonging to me currently. So I can go ahead and select a few things here and make this change. So I got a few things, and I'm going to go ahead, this piece of wall, and I'm going to move it. I'm going to move it to 400 millimeters. Believe it or not, this building, the house is in Boston, but they did it in millimeters, so bigger. Okay, so I made a change there, and let's also change the door because it's a little hard to access now that it's so narrow. And I'll go to my type selector and pick a double flush door. So I made that change. Quickly, I go to my Collaborate tab, Synchronize with Central, and Synchronize Now. So the key thing here is to sync early and sync often, because it's going to be a better experience than if you wait the whole day and synchronize late. And let's go back again to the engineer side and just verify that he can see that change. Okay, it's not there yet, and it's not going to be there yet until you refresh. And you refresh by, again, on the Collaborate tab, you reload latest. If I were to synchronize with Central and pick one of these options, this one down at the bottom also pulls down changes. So it sends your changes back to the server and pulls down any updates. We'll just do reload latest, and you'll see that here in just a second. That change will be affected. There you go. We'll do one more change here. I'm on the engineering side. Let's go ahead and open up another model. And I'm going to go to my shortcut here and open up car park. Notice that it does not say create new local, because this is a standalone Revit model that's linked into my project. And I'm just going to get to a certain vantage point. Zoom in a little bit here. Okay, I'm going to take this wall, this piece of wall here, and move it out flush. To the end wall. Okay, made that change. I can just save because it's not a central file, just do a normal save. And now if I go back to the architect's project at his desktop, and let's go to another view, one showing the car park. Okay, so it's still showing the old way. If I click on it, you notice I'm getting this big blue highlight. It knows this thing is a Revit link. It's not a, it's actually an external file. And I can tell that if I go to Manage Links, I have two linked Revit files in this project. I can select them all. So if I was working with my MEP and structural people, I could just highlight all their links, and it helps if I move this off to the side a little bit so you can see that wall change. And I'm going to do reload and say OK. And you'll see that wall just updated. It updates very, very quickly as it re-reads. It's already linked in. Doesn't have to do a lot of work. Just need to show it in its new format. So you can imagine if you had a very dense 150 megabyte MEP project file, and you just hit reload latest, and suddenly you start to see that, well, wait a minute, I've got some text now going through my beam. So I'm seeing that now as opposed to a week later when you've done all this other work. So this is the way you can actually collaborate real time, live with your engineers. So I think this is actually a very, very an excellent way to work and to save time, save weeks of time and aggravation. Okay, so this will conclude the sort of live portion. Now let's go back to a PowerPoint and minimize my desktop here and go to PowerPoint slide. So we just saw how smart Revit is with its synchronization and its save and so forth. There are these two versions, and when you mouse over these things in Revit, it will show you kind of what it does, but it's like a little paragraph. It's kind of hard to read. So what I've done here is put it in a chart format so you can find out what it is that you're really doing. If you synchronize now, I think it's like you're telling it, I just want to keep on working. Just put my stuff up, extend up my changes, pull down the changes from the team, and it does one other little thing here. But keep on working. I don't want to change anything else. Just keep on going. As opposed to synchronize with modify settings, this gives you the ability to send your changes back up to the central model. It does not pull down. You have to use the reload latest afterwards. And a bunch of optional things that you can do. So if you're going to change your work mode and check in a few work sets, maybe check out a few others, that's why you do this one. All the other buttons are up here. There's tons more collaborative things that I have not shown you because we don't have time in this short session to show it. I really want to show other things about working in a private cloud. Again, it's saving and synchronizing. Revit is smart. I love this application. It's come a long ways even from when I started with it in 2006, and this gets better and better. So just to recap a little bit, we are showing and looking at a BIM Project Cloud. We saw that we have these secure drives. And in these secure drives, we have the S for secure. Each entity, each business entity has areas that they can have their secure folders. Not even visible to the other entities. This is really critical for a lot of people to work together. Kind of a very foundational type of thing that's critical for collaborating together. You also have then a shared area for your project. Now, right now, as I set up this particular desktop and cloud environment, it is set up with the project area is wide open. So everybody has read-write access. But in reality, you might do a much more granular type of security setting for those folders. And a typical scenario is you want people to have read access to where you put your Revit central model files, but not necessarily write access to everybody, because you want to, the structural engineer may not want other people opening up their files. So that makes sense. But you need to be able to see them so you can link them together. And that sort of facilitated security level works just great. And we have a resources folder that supports this sort of collaborative team up there in the cloud with their own shared resources. Now, I added this slide just recently regarding virtual desktops, because we talk about virtual desktops, and it is almost like this cartoon desktop. It's nebulous. What is it? It's amorphous. It's just this thing that you have that you reach. There's a lot more to it, actually, and it can be much more configurable than you might imagine. So we're going to talk about that on the next slide. So virtual desktops, what are they really about? there are three basic types, right, when you boil it all down. And the one that's been around the longest has been a regular cloud desktop is a thing called a VDI. That stands for Virtual Desktop Infrastructure. It also stands for Virtual Desktop Interface. They're both out there. I can't figure out which one takes precedence, but they're used interchangeably. And I have an example here that there are some configurable options when you do go about employing a cloud space or a private cloud or project cloud. So your desktop, in this case on a VDI, can be, it's going to have an operating system. Be either Windows 7, 64-bit, Windows 8. You're going to have a certain amount of storage. You have to start out at 100 gigabytes. If you need more, it can be dialed up. It's not like you have to put in a new hard drive on the back end on virtualization scenarios. It's all configurable, so you can just sort of crank these things up or down at will. You may have 1, 2, or 4 virtual CPUs. You're going to have a certain amount of RAM. The desktop that you just saw me on is one of these desktops with these particular specifications. It has 16 gigs of RAM. It does have a standard virtual graphics adapter. Now, this is going to be key when you see the next one, because each virtualization vendor, such as Citrix, Microsoft, and VMware, will have a standard video driver, video graphics driver that's virtualized. It does fine in most cases, but for some of the higher performance applications, particularly some of the CAD apps, the next offering is really the better solution, particularly for in certain cases, in certain file types, in certain applications. So this is called a VDI with a virtual GPU pass-through. You can shorten that, call it a cloud desktop with vGPU. The word vGPU is kind of the acronym that's out there. And this is basically the VDI is connected to a physical GPU resource for the higher-end graphics performance. Typically, because NVIDIA rules the world and it leads the world in terms of the highest and the best technology for graphics adapters and video, if you go with a vGPU solution, whether it's home-brewed or in your office or through a provider or whatever, most typically you're going to be using an NVIDIA, like a Quadro class, a business class with video card, or let's say an NVIDIA Grid. Now that's a multi-user shared sort of virtual GPU resource, which is storming the world these days because it's relatively new. In fact, it only came out last year in 2013, and it's rapidly becoming an industry standard because the performance is a quantum leap above what was available previously, particularly for certain applications. You're talking about like 3ds Max and Rhino, these visualization applications that really put the video graphics through the ropes, and you need to have a higher powered engine to sort of drive that graphics to get the sort of glass-like orbiting and screen transitions that you would want it to expect if you had a regular workstation. There is another class, it's called Cloud Workstation, and that's where you actually have a dedicated physical workstation in a data center that's accessed remotely. Now, as you might imagine, this has the highest level of configurability and performance because it could be almost anything you want. Now, there might be some standard offerings, but if you're looking for solid-state drives and a $2,000 high-performance video card or whatever, because you're spending 40 hours a week doing renderings and animations, then this might be the better solution for you as well. So the key thing to remember here is that virtual desktops are not a one-size-fits-all solution. There are actually a whole variety of solutions out there in different versions. So there is a level of configurability on each, and this gives you the ability to match desktop types with the user needs. And also the types of applications they're using and what their performance requirements are. This is often overlooked and is found out sort of after the fact when businesses go to embrace virtualization and move to the cloud, and they don't really consider what the individual users actually need, and they sort of apply a one-size-fits-all solution, and then after the fact there's some people might complain because they're power users and need a better resource. So it is very configurable. Just give that some thought when you do virtualize. Revit best practices in the cloud. I can't overemphasize this enough. This is really, really important. In fact, I was working on some Revit audits just recently, and it always seems to come down to the same issue, and that is you need to localize all Revit links to the cloud because Revit is heavy data. They're big files, often linked to other big files. And if you're going to try to pull these across the wire to when you open them and manipulate them, you're going to find a very slow experience. So it's really key to find all your Revit links and into CAD links as well, because I find that most people still link a lot of AutoCAD drawings in or Rhino files or whatever you're bringing in, and copy those to the cloud folders, then relink them to the central file to point to the cloud copies. You also need to look a little deeper, and most people don't really realize that they might be using nested level XREFs, or I call it XREFs from my AutoCAD days, but nested level links. And Revit will default to auto attaching links as a overlay style. And when it's an overlay style, it's only seen one level deep. So you can, in fact, have multiple XREFs or Revit links and CAD links that you're not even aware of. You need to drop down into each of those attachments and then look to see if there's any additional ones. And if there are, copy those up to the cloud and make them local as well. This is kind of a good one. It's something that I think will make us smarter as we start approaching and embracing cloud computing. And that is we need to adapt to multi-party collaboration. And often, my experience with teams that are working in a project cloud, it might be their first or maybe their second time on a project, and this is the first time they're actually working with their engineers real time, and it's important to know that the work of one can affect all the others in terms of the model performance. So you need to develop probably some BIM procedures and protocols to make that a little smoother, to make sure that everybody is doing really good file maintenance and protocols to ensure smooth and fast operations. Okay, problems. There are always problems, of course, because we're dealing with large, complicated applications. Revit, AutoCAD, ArchiCAD, whatever you're using for your BIM solution. These files are complicated, and of course, their interactions can be fraught with problems. And as I mentioned in the previous bullet item, a poorly optimized Revit model by one party can impact the others, and I've seen this firsthand. So it's good to be as lean and mean as you can and really stay smart about your file linking and how keep your model small and lean where you're purging and not loading it up with all kinds of stuff. So this is a collaboration issue, though. And the reason I mention these problems here because when people move to the cloud, they often, when they run into some issues, the knee-jerk reaction is to say, oh, it's the cloud. The cloud's doing this because I haven't seen that problem before, and it's got to be the cloud. When, in fact, I have actually reviewed a lot of these cases and get into the Revit files and audit them and whatnot, I have found that most often performance issues are related to file-based issues or files that might be outside the cloud, and therefore you're having linking issues and those type of things. So just be sure that you actually look thoroughly. Hopefully, when you're working, you have some IT-type resources or BIM or CAD Manager resources to help you out with your work. There can be issues caused by platform itself. So Windows itself can cause issues with your files. This is a particularly recent one. It took us a long time to narrow this one down. There is now what I call an infamous Windows update, a particular update. The numbers there. If you, everybody will get a copy of this particular presentation if you would like it, and I could or you can email me with requesting information about details on this particular update, how to affect an improvement on it. The update is part of IE Internet Explorer 10 and Internet Explorer 11. And some users are actually, Revit users are opting to stay on Internet Explorer 9. Many people are using other browsers anyway. So this particular KB comes in automatically. It ruins or affects some of your Revit colors. It gives all these weird defects. And it's important to know this was not caused by cloud. This was caused by Windows. And in 2014, Revit had a lot of problems with the ribbon. Ribbon instability would just go wacko at times. And it seems that if you read the blogs, it really is happening because of a defect in a new feature in Revit 2014, which are these tabbed palettes. And randomly, your ribbon just goes wacky. Parts of your other screen go kind of wacky in Revit. And there's an easy way to get that, to sort of work around that. Again, if you want to know some of the workarounds, feel free to ping me. I'll have my email posted at the end, and you can send a request for some information. I'll be happy to respond. Revit Server. We're going to spend a little bit of time here finishing up on Revit Server, what it is, and possibly what it's not. It is generally misunderstood. I worked for an Autodesk reseller for nearly 2 years, and invariably 2 or 3 times a week I would get somebody asking about Revit Server. Can I use it? I want to use it because I have engineers and I want to get them onto my Revit Server so we can collaborate. They're really interested in this because it's free. It's right there on the disk. And why not use something called Revit Server? It sounds cool. There can be hidden costs. In fact, usually there are escalating costs that invariably happen once you start implementing Revit Server. So the biggest misunderstanding or misconception is that it allows collaboration with your consultants. It doesn't. It was designed by Autodesk, and you can read this in the Revit Server Wiki help, online help, that it was developed as a WAN solution for one organization with multiple offices, because once you enable work sharing, as I did today, it doesn't work too well when you're actually in multiple offices. So they developed Revit Server for that purpose, which it actually does well in that scenario. What you can get, or what you might need if you really do want to use Revit Server and get your consultants on board, is a third-party software utility for that outside collaboration. And there really aren't many offerings out there right now, but there is one from Imagine It. It's called Clarity. That's a family of products. There's one called Clarity Connect. It just provides the connection itself without some of the other bells and whistles and the other versions of the software. And this will give the ability to provide authentication, to have an outside entity with their Revit Server come in and connect to your Revit Server and then collaborate together. I don't know what it costs, but I've heard it said it is somewhat expensive. What does Revit Server actually do? It does some good stuff. It accelerates the sync to central. You saw me do a sync to central. It does this in a more optimized way. It acts as a traffic cop for sync transactions, so that 2 people aren't trying to sync at the same time. It will sort of watch out for those collisions and manage the potential collisions. And most importantly, it caches the model to each local location on a WAN, which is great, because then every an office that has multiple locations, they'll be operating Revit as if they're operating local and not across a wide area network. So all these 3 things go together to really facilitate Revit work sharing on a WAN, its intended purpose. And a lot of people use this. A lot of people like it. It is free, and when it's set up right under optimal conditions, it works just fine. So how does that look in an actual diagram? So I have this diagram here where I have highlighted the fact and emphasized the fact this is one organization, so I'm calling it ABC Architects. They have 3 offices. And when you install Revit Server, it has 3 roles that you can install. So it has the host role, which is the primary one, and you're going to put that on a physical server. And in this scenario, because there are 3 offices, this is probably will be on-premise for one of these 3 businesses. These other 2, these 3 offices are in 3 different states, let's say. Then you go to in each office, you pick another server, and you're going to install an accelerator role. And what that does for each location is it enables 2-way communication back to the host, and the host will send down updated central file information on about a 3-minute heartbeat. And so on the accelerators, there resides a local replica of the central file that's always being updated, real time, constantly being updated. And you can see each office will have then a totally update central file that's a replica. And then in turn, each user is working totally local to the accelerator. So they're saving the central, but they're actually saving to the accelerator, and the accelerator is handling the actual synchronizing it back to the central file. But they're always up to date with their files. When they do reload latest, they're pulling it down from the accelerator. When you think about this particular diagram and the organization of it, it's really smart. I like how they've done this. It's an elegant solution. There's, however, a couple things that can cause some concern. And one is, let's go back to these arrows here. These represent your communications from the accelerator to your host. In one location here, it's at land speed because it's local to that one business. On the other 2 offices, most likely it's going through some sort of circuit, and you have to be sure that that circuit is equipped and sized to handle the traffic that's going to go through it. So does it have enough capacity? What's the bandwidth? What's the latency on those lines? If they're too slow to get the data through fast enough, you can actually end up with some major concerns, which is it can, if you're syncing the central and you don't have enough bandwidth or pipe to sync the central, it's very, very common happening. You can, the sync the central might stall, and the central file becomes corrupt. You go out on the blogs, read about Revit Server so you're up to speed on what it does and what the issues are, what the management issues are, and you'll find out that that is one of the issues. The other thing that you're typically going to find, oh, let me go back here too. I forgot about the 3rd role, which is the admin role. It's very tempting on the server just to use Windows Explorer and start popping folders and files up there. You can't do that. You really need to use the accelerator, use the admin console that comes with Revit Server to create the folders and security using the built-in tool to do that. If you do it manually, you're going to corrupt the environment. Most likely, you're also going to need a optimization appliance. This happens very frequently. Go to any blog sites that talk about their Revit Server issues and problems. Most everybody has ended up purchasing a Riverbed appliance to get through, to accelerate these pipes. These are very expensive. They can go from anywhere from about $3,000 to about $15,000, so they're a major investment. And after you set up all this infrastructure, you do it for each release. So if I do it for 2013 and 2014 out there, I get to, the infrastructure's there, but I have to reinstall, hook up all the pieces for the next release. And I do the same. 2015 is coming out like right now, and you got to do it again. And then there are people putting it in the cloud. I'm running short on time, so I don't have time to explain why I don't think this is a particularly good idea, and there's some real caveats to doing that, but I find this less than ideal. You already have a lot of complexity, so I don't encourage that. Revit Server detail, everything about bandwidth and latency. Typically, they use the amount of 100 milliseconds as the maximum that you can allow. You want less than that typically. If you have more than that, like 100 milliseconds and above, you have a serious risk of file corruption happening to the central file. There is a vault scenario, and people are surprised by this, but when you have Revit files, they become totally isolated in the Revit server, and only central files go in there. So even your link files don't go in there, so now you're separating them out into multiple locations. The hidden costs I talked about, you might have a dedicated server. You might need to increase bandwidth. WAN optimization appliances, and the possibility of third-party add-ons and layers of overhead and management. So there is a domino effect that I've seen played out over and over again with Revit Server. Project Cloud summary. We're almost at the tail end here. I like it for many reasons, and as a CAD manager for many years, I really do like the solution because I think it really does work. You do get, it's one of the few solutions out there where you can get real-time Revit model updates done with your engineers. It's flexible and scalable. It centralizes the data, makes a lot of sense, it's not redundant. No more pushing around heavy BIM data, which is critical. Now you can enable the consultant access for full security. That again goes back to one of the main reasons why you use a Project Cloud. A couple nice effects. I've heard this said of people who have teams who have been in Project Clouds. So these actual 2 bullet items came from such teams. They say that it encourages accountability and higher quality design because there's transparency. The models are there and they're always being seen. You see what level of work is being done by each party. And if there's collisions, you're going to see it right now. You're not going to see it a week later and waste time. And in a private cloud, there isn't a need for Revit Server itself. Again, I'm not disparaging Revit Server. I think it's a good product. I like how it's designed. It's really smart, works for a lot of people. But in a project cloud scenario, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because you're already centralizing that data. In a cloud desktops, you're already in a LAN-like situation. So avoid the complexity and remove the risk of model corruption. There's a lot less risk of Revit model corruption under a LAN situation than in a remote situation. I like it for its elegant simplicity of centralized data in the cloud. For summary, we're just about at the time here. Again, it's customizable and flexible. You can add or remove seats at will. There, we talked about the BIM Project Cloud variant of a private cloud. And I have this concept of one cloud infrastructure, which is your entire enterprise or your entire project or studio has a cloud and all the desktops and software in it. You want to use other types of cloud resources, let's say BIM 360 Blue and Field, fine. That works just fine from there as well. Talk about the work sharing compatibility, capability of Revit, and some of the best practices. And you know I'm a believer of the sort of centralized data model and its simplicity and efficiency. And we talked about Revit Server, understanding how it works for that context. So that actually concludes my AIA CES course for today. I hope this was of some value for you folks. You will be contacted for the AIA members themselves that registered. You will be contacted and be sent information and this link, the SurveyMonkey link. However, the SurveyMonkey link is available for anyone that is attending today. If you'd like to give some feedback, I'd be glad to hear from you folks. And this is the link that you'll see. It has my AIA number appended to the end, so it's just https://surveymonkey.com/F for survey and A2K, that's short for Advanced 2000, 002 AIA CES. So if you would take a few minutes or moments at some point to fill out that survey, that would be terrific. And at this point, I'm going to well, do some questions and answers. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my panel so I can see if there's any questions here. Expand it a little bit. Okay, somebody's asking what is the lag, and you might be saying lag because you're seeing a video. I assume if you're talking about the lag, you're talking about the fact that when I minimize my screen, which is where I'm presenting from, I'm now traveling to another desktop. Maybe you're seeing lag there. So that could be, when you do this, you're seeing it secondhand. On your desktop, when you arrive at your remote desktop, it's going to be firsthand, and it will be faster. Okay, so Okay, just a second, please. Okay, I'm getting quite. I'm doing this by myself here, so I'm not. The questions sort of go by fast, but they're asking about VMware versus Citrix. Which would you prefer? They both have their benefits, and they both go sort of tit for tat, if you will, in terms of capabilities. But they're both good. So it really doesn't matter. Each works fine. Currently, we actually work with all of them. And I don't really necessarily have a preference one over the other. I've used Citrix, I've used VMware. You saw VMware here today. That's fine. I'm going to try to scroll through some of these questions here that I can see. I got a question. What are the bandwidth requirements for a graphics-heavy workstation? Have you used Citrix? Okay. For heavy graphics, again, what you really need to be looking at these days is to look at the newer, like NVIDIA Grid, the virtual GPU solutions, because that has been designed technology-wise for the virtualization community. This is the first real offering where NVIDIA, major players, said, okay, we're going to develop video cards for virtualization and make this accessible to a virtualized desktop. And we've done extensive testing here on this resource in the last many months, and the performance is really quite excellent in most applications. So if you're revolving or orbiting a model that's fairly dense in Revit or 3ds Max model or something like that, it's going to seem almost like you're on a workstation. So that's a definite improvement. So this is the way it's going to go. If that didn't really do well for you, you could always just go to a physical workstation if that's the thing you need. But so far as bandwidth, it's the more you can get, the better. And its bandwidth is not just the rating of how much bandwidth you have, it's also its quality, how much jitter and noise and so forth on the line. So you need to do speed tests and ensure that you're getting the highest quality line that you can get. I do have a question about Buzzsaw. So can Buzzsaw be used for Revit collaboration? And I mean, it can be used for collaboration. I'm actually a real fan of Buzzsaw. I used Buzzsaw for a number of years, and I was actually an administrator for Buzzsaw project set when I worked for Sasaki Associates, a large architecture engineering firm here in Boston. And it's good software, but it's really when you think about it, it's like a glorified FTP in essence. It's rather expensive, but it works well. For document management, I call it a pseudo document management application. You can enable file locking, but it's too easy to circumvent that file locking and to bypass it. And before you know it, you have people saving over each other's files, and the last person who saves wins. Those types of scenarios. So so far as Revit file locking, which is very, very specific, I don't think would work for Revit at all. So let me go to a few more questions. Okay, it says, we're using RDP for Revit now, and users complain that lag makes working difficult. Will the cloud VDI solution, is that also a problem? Again, you have 3 different levels under a VDI or remote desktop situation. And as a protocol, I don't even recommend RDP. It's fine for getting there. It's fine for general file access. For 3D, it's not great. It's probably the slower of any of the other solutions out there. So under VMware, Citrix, using their protocol, VMware uses PC over IP. There are optimizations built into the clients that make for better experience and better, better usage of things like Revit, large applications, large models in the cloud. You can then also you can go with the virtual GPU, and then that experience gets even better because it depends. We have, I've seen people that use a standard VDI for Revit under VMware and under Citrix, and they're happy. And I see other people that say, well, they're not happy. and they really want to use a virtual GPU solution because they're using very, very large models, very dense types of models, and the types of entities and work that they're doing, so to mandate perhaps a higher level solution. So it really depends on what you're doing as well. I'm going to randomly mix in some other questions here. I've read about connecting up Revit servers in the cloud using free Google storage. Isn't that a cheaper alternative? I've been reading up a lot on a number of these options that people are thinking about, and they try and so forth. This one's interesting. I've heard that you can get other people, your consultant, and under some sort of jerry-rigged Revit server installed to cloud storage someplace. I've also heard that, again, the file corruption issue is still an issue under that scenario, as well as Autodesk won't support it, and I think that's pretty important. All right, time for, we have until 2:15, about 5 more minutes. If you want to hang on here, answer a few more questions. Okay, this question here, what is your recommendation to deal with collaboration between different continents? And, that's a really good question. There are some ways to handle that. We do have, I've seen situations or architectural firms that have players or team members in other countries in Europe. And Europe is fairly doable. There is a higher level of latency there, but as you're only pushing screen clicks, mouse clicks and screen changes, pixel changes back to your desktop. In some scenarios, I've seen where they're okay for this project. They're okay with that higher level of latency, and you get a bit of lag in the mouse and so forth. Is it doable? In some cases, it is for some people because it's really important for the project. For others, that they may need to look at other solutions. Certainly, most of our customer base is in North America, but we do have people that are now working and looking at overseas and other locations. Okay, I have a question about using standalone Revit licensing. Can it be used in the cloud as opposed to network licensing? Because I've mentioned about the network license managers. Autodesk actually, each software manufacturer might have its own requirements for licensing in remote desktop scenarios. Autodesk requires network licensing, and it makes sense. I'm a firm believer of network licensing because, number one, it ensures license compliance. If you have 10 Revit licenses that's being doled out by a network license manager, you can install that on 100 or 1,000 desktops, doesn't matter, and you can only use 10 at once. So by nature of that type of licensing mode, you're always license compliant. And it really makes a lot of sense. And I'm always surprised when I hear firms that didn't really take advantage of the using network licensing, because you get some efficiencies with that. And I can go back to where I used to work at Sasaki Associates. There were about 350 people at the time. And we had an office in San Francisco, and we had an office, our main office is near Boston. In San Francisco, we had 30 active AutoCAD users at the time. They eventually switched over to Revit, but they had 30 active AutoCAD users who used 21 AutoCAD licenses. That's 9 licenses at $5,000 a pop. We did not have to buy. That saves $45,000, which is quite good. In our main office, where we had, I had about 180 CAD users, we had 86 AutoCAD. And that's an awful lot of money. It's like $500,000 worth of AutoCAD licensing I did not have to buy. Even when we do small applications like add-ons, we had something called AutoTurn, which does the turning radii for fire vehicles, other large vehicles. AutoCAD plugins, we bought network licensing. So we had a 4-user network license, and I had about 60 installations. Doesn't matter I have 60 installations. I'm allowed to, you can only run 4 at once, and that worked just fine. So. And that's an expensive application. It's $2,200 a piece. So that was a good way of getting more bang for the buck with your money if you buy network licensing. But to play in the cloud, yes, you do network licensing for Autodesk products. And with that, I think we're at the end of our Q&A time. And I'm sorry, there are a lot more questions that I saw coming that I had a chance to answer. Feel free to email me. You have my email address there. Jot that down, and I will be sending out a sort of a course PDF to attendees, and you can certainly contact me if you have any further questions. And if the question I can't answer, then I will pass it along to somebody who can answer. But I want to thank you all for joining, and I really do appreciate your questions and your attendance today. Take care.